Oh. This is a Monstera Deliciosa that I've had for about 20 years. This thing grows so fast, and each year the leaves get bigger and bigger, and I absolutely love it. But every 3 to 4 years, I have to do something a little bit drastic. In the past, I've let it get even bigger than this because I do have a lovely space that it has fit perfectly in my sunny room, but that was before I got this. Just before Christmas, the opportunity presented itself to rescue this beautiful baby grand piano, and I just could not pass that up. So less than a week later, it was moved. This thing got shifted over and is now blocking this whole entire doorway, and we can't really have that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm actually a professional pianist with a degree in classical piano performance, and I run a full-time teaching studio here at home with 45 students. So I'm basically a professional musician with an insatiable passion for gardening, and I think that's a pretty good combination. I have a winter job and a summer job, and they balance each other beautifully. So until last month, this corner of our sunny room has been reserved solely for this big, beautiful thing, but it has now been bumped and needs to get smaller if it's going to be able to stay in this space. So like I said, I've done this before. Every 3 to 4 years or so, I go through this process. And I've had this thing for about 20 years. It started with a single cutting. The leaves were maybe about this small, similar to some of these leaves in the center of the plant actually that are still fairly small. But I repotted it in a much bigger pot this time, and that has contributed to the leaves being able to grow so large this time around. So it now has 3 growth points, and they produce these aerial roots along the stems. So I do like to mist it in the winter because the air is really dry in here. We live in a pretty cold climate around zone 6, so the air does get really dry, mostly due to how much we have to heat the house. And this is a tropical vining plant that climbs up trees in its natural environment, so it does have the potential to be absolutely massive. And these aerial roots will help with stability in its natural environment as well as gathering moisture from the air. In the home though, if they get in the way, you can cut those aerial roots down, and I'm only going to leave the newest 1 to 2 on each growth point and cut them down to about 6 or 8 inches or whatever will fit into its newest pot. Okay, so I have a large bowl of water, I have a smaller bowl of water, I have a towel because I'll probably need it, and since my good secateurs are fairly dull, I'm going to use a kitchen knife, which will work just fine. So I'm going to find each growth point, and I'm going to take, I think I'm going to take 3 leaves from each one. This growth point here has just put out a new leaf, and it doesn't have any aerial roots yet. So I'd like to get 2 aerial roots on each one. So that would be about 3 leaves. So I'm going to do the first one. So there is your Monstera cutting, right there. There's 1, 2, 3 leaves. There's 1 good size aerial root and a slightly smaller one. The new roots will come off of these, and this right here is where the new leaf will come from. And since this plant has to build itself a whole new root system, you are not going to get any new leaves for quite a while. These things are pretty tough. That will be just fine. I am going to pot these up right away. I'm just putting them in water for now so that I can get them off. And then once I've done that, I'll go get a pot ready. So here is the second growth point right here. And this is the one with the big giant leaves. This is much more of a mature stem than the other one. And I'm still going to take 1, 2, 3 leaves. I'm feeling a lot of aerial root bumps on the other side of this. Let's get this off and then I'm going to show you. Let's see. More aerial roots there. This is not the best tool. Oh, it's like cutting down a tree. So here's the second cutting, and this is the first time I've seen 2, 3, 4, 6 aerial roots, 7 in between 2 sets of leaves. And then there's 3 more down there. That's fantastic. We can zoom in on the stem too. If you look carefully, you can see that it's a lot bumpier than the other one was. Same with this one. These 2 were by far the biggest leaves on the plant. The system here is not the best, but let's see if we can get that sort of in some water. No. That's going to be okay for now. And the third one is here. There we go. Much smoother stems. 1, 2, 3 aerial roots. That's perfect. Now, having done that, some of these leaves are a little dusty. Having done that, I should say that this is still a perfectly fine plant. You could keep this if you have a nice big space you want to fill, you want it to be a little bit more on the bushy side instead of the really tall and skinny side. This would be perfectly fine. It will take some time, but you'll get some new growth points coming out of the leaf axils here. I have done that before and it's worked really well. Having said that though, at the moment we're in the depths of winter. It is mid-January. There's not a whole lot of light. We are fairly far up north and we get about 8.5 hours during the darkest time of the year. And generally speaking, less than 10 hours a day is not really enough to support any kind of significant growth. But that should start to happen throughout the late spring and summer when you're getting a lot more daylight. Monstera care in general is pretty simple. Things that apply to all houseplants is don't keep them near cold drafts or hot air vents like forced air furnaces or heat pumps or things like that, wood stoves, which just suck the moisture out of the plant, which is what they don't want. This is a tropical plant, remember, so misting it in the winter if your air is dry is really helpful. And because the air is dry, your plant will tend to need a little bit more water. You can let it dry out a little bit between waterings. General rule of thumb is to let the top couple of inches dry out and then water it deeply. You don't have to feed it through the winter. I tend to keep feeding just a dilute feed through the winter, about 1/3 of what I normally would, just so that it doesn't have nothing, and then it's usually ready to spring back into growth when the light levels start to come up in the spring. Now, I don't actually have room to keep this part of the plant, so I'm going to use these leaves in a different way. They make really good decor. I'm essentially going to cut these leaves up and use them sort of like a cut flower arrangement throughout the house. So some of them are pretty old and dusty. I'll probably use them anyway. Let's start with the smaller ones. There we go. This is the smallest leaf on the plant. It's probably one that came out right after I repotted it the last time. And it's normal if your leaves get a little smaller after repotting. It's a little bit painful to do this, but it's worth it. So the new pot this is going in is a simple dark tinted terracotta pot. I love the look of these, and I have a couple of this size. One is housing my large Meyer lemon tree that's also in this room. I'm using just a regular bagged potting mix. I filled the pot downstairs and then brought it up. I'm pushing these cuttings into the soil just until some of the roots are buried and the cuttings are stable. One of them sort of wasn't. I had to push it a little bit deeper. The soil has lots of moisture in it already. I'm not even going to water it for a few days because I want these roots to have to work a little bit right away. And I don't want to disturb the soil and risk these cuttings falling over because they're pretty top heavy and have basically nothing but a few inches of soil holding them in at this point. And here it is, and we can actually walk through this doorway now without having to turn sideways, which is important because we use this doorway a lot. So I am going to water this just lightly in a couple of days. I just don't want the soil to dry out at this point. There aren't really any roots up there to soak up the water, so it doesn't need a ton of it. There just needs to be enough moisture in the surrounding area to convince those roots to start growing outwards and then looking for water. So probably in about a week, I'll give it a bit more water. I will probably actually fill up the tray on the bottom and keep more of the moisture lower down so that the roots grow that way, and then maybe in a couple of weeks I'll start watering it a bit more thoroughly. I did find a little bit of pea gravel to put over the top, which I do love the look of. I didn't have enough, but I know that's something I can get in town, so I'll likely go do that next time I'm out running errands. And I don't know, that might even help with the stability a little bit, but mostly I just really like the look of it. But in a few months we might see some signs of new growth, and once it pushes out a couple more leaves, maybe one on each growth point, it'll get a little bit more height and then fill out this space a little bit more. But I think it's lovely as it is now and is a much more acceptable size for the space that it has. And all those leaves that I cut off are currently sitting in a big bucket of water still. But tomorrow I'm going to go find some vases and place them around the house. No sense in wasting them and just tossing them on the compost, at least not for a couple of weeks. So that is a job for tomorrow. And for today, I'm going to say thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.